a woman who walks alone with no friends, Bible wisdom. In a world that constantly tells us we need to be surrounded by friends, have you ever wondered if walking alone might actually be your greatest strength? Today, we're diving deep into something that many women struggle with, but few dare to discuss openly: walking alone with no friends and finding divine strength in solitude. What makes this message different? Unlike typical advice that pushes you to just make more friends or join more social groups, we're going to explore a profound biblical truth that might completely transform how you view your solitary journey. You see, society has conditioned us to believe that a woman's worth is measured by the size of her social circle. But what if I told you that some of the most powerful women in the Bible walked alone? What if your season of solitude isn't a punishment, but divine appointment? Think about it for a moment. When was the last time someone told you it was okay to walk alone? When did anyone validate your choice to stand firm in your solitude? Has anyone ever shown you how to find strength in these quiet moments? This message isn't just another pep talk. Today, we're going to uncover biblical wisdom that will revolutionize how you view your journey. By the end of this video, you'll understand why God sometimes calls strong women to walk alone, how to transform your solitude into spiritual strength, the secret power that lies within your alone season, and most importantly, how to find unshakable peace in your path. Before we continue this powerful journey together, I want to know if this message resonates with you. If you're currently walking alone or feeling called to a season of solitude, type strength in the comments below. Your story matters and your journey is significant. Remember, sometimes the most powerful position a woman can be in is standing alone, not because she has to, but because God has called her to. Let's dive in and discover the divine purpose in your solitary path. Part 1. Understanding the solitary path. Have you ever wondered why some of the most powerful biblical women walked a solitary path? What made Ruth leave everything familiar behind to follow an unseen calling? And why does society struggle to understand those who choose to walk alone? Let me share with you the profound story of Ruth, a woman whose solitary journey changed the course of history. Picture this: Moab, centuries ago, where a young widow named Ruth faced the most pivotal decision of her life. Her mother-in-law, Naomi, had lost everything: her husband and both sons, including Ruth's husband. In that era, a widow without family support faced not just emotional isolation, but often physical survival challenges. The cultural context here is crucial to understand. In ancient Near Eastern society, a woman's security was deeply tied to her male relatives and social connections. Without these, she was considered vulnerable, often ostracized, and faced severe economic hardship. This makes Ruth's next decision even more remarkable. When Naomi decided to return to Bethlehem, she urged her two daughters-in-law to return to their families in Moab. This was the logical choice, the safe choice. Orpah, Ruth's sister-in-law, chose this path. But Ruth, she chose differently. Where you go, I will go, and where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and your God, my God. Ruth 1:16. These words echo through history, not just as a declaration of loyalty, but as a profound choice to walk a solitary path. Think about it. Ruth wasn't just leaving her homeland. She was choosing to become a foreigner in a strange land. She was choosing to be different, to be marked as an outsider. But what's fascinating about Ruth's story isn't just her choice to leave, it's what happened in her solitude. In Bethlehem, she wasn't immediately accepted. The biblical narrative shows us a woman who worked alone in the fields, gathering leftover grain. She faced suspicious glances, whispered conversations, and likely outright rejection from some in the community. Yet, in this solitude, something extraordinary happened. Ruth's character began to shine. The local people started noticing not her foreignness, but her dedication, her work ethic, her loyalty. Boaz, a prominent man in the community, observed that she had come to take refuge under the wings of the God of Israel. Ruth 2:12. This is where we discover a profound truth about walking alone. It's not about isolation, it's about transformation. Ruth's solitary path wasn't a punishment, it was a preparation. In her aloneness, she developed strength that couldn't have been forged in the comfort of community. Consider how this applies to your own life. When you choose to walk alone, whether by circumstance or by divine calling, you're not just experiencing solitude, you're entering a sacred space where your character can be refined, where your faith can be strengthened, where your purpose can become clear. Remember, Ruth's solitary journey led her to become the great-grandmother of King David, placing her directly in the lineage of Jesus Christ. Who could have predicted that outcome when she first chose her lonely path? But here's what makes this even more relevant to us today. In our hyper-connected world, choosing to walk alone is often seen as failure. Social media constantly bombards us with images of community, friendship, and togetherness. Yet, like Ruth, some of us are called to seasons of solitude, not because we're antisocial, but because we're being prepared for something greater. As we begin to understand this solitary path, we discover something even more powerful, the unique partnership that develops between a woman and her God when all other voices fade away. This is where we find the true essence of divine companionship. The story of Ruth teaches us that walking alone doesn't mean walking without purpose. Sometimes it means walking with even greater purpose, one that requires the strength that only solitude can build. As we continue, we'll explore how this divine partnership transforms what others might see as loneliness into a sacred journey of discovery and purpose. Part 2. The Divine Partnership. Have you ever wondered what happens in those quiet moments when you feel completely alone? What if I told you that in those very moments, you're actually experiencing one of the most powerful partnerships possible? And what if Mary, the mother of Jesus, could show us exactly how this divine partnership works? Let me take you back to a moment that changed history, not in a grand palace or a bustling marketplace, but in the quiet solitude of a young woman's room in Nazareth. Picture this: Mary, barely more than a teenager, going about her daily routine. The sun is setting over the small town of Nazareth, casting long shadows through narrow windows. In this ordinary moment, something extraordinary is about to happen. Suddenly, she's not alone. The angel Gabriel appears with news that would shake the foundations of her world. Greetings, you who are highly favored. The Lord is with you. Luke 1:28. Now, put yourself in Mary's position for a moment. This isn't just about receiving a message. It's about receiving a calling that would set her apart from everyone she knew. A calling that would make her walk alone. The biblical account tells us that Mary was greatly troubled at these words. Of course she was. This divine partnership would mean facing judgment from her community, potential rejection from Joseph, her betrothed, and a journey no other woman had ever walked. But here's where we witness something remarkable. In that solitary moment, Mary demonstrates the essence of divine partnership. Her response: "I am the Lord's servant. May your word to me be fulfilled." Luke 1:38. This wasn't blind acceptance. This was courage born of intimate partnership with God. Mary understood something profound that we often miss. True partnership with God often requires stepping away from human partnerships. Think about what happened next. Mary didn't immediately run to share this news with friends or seek validation from her community. Instead, she went to spend time with Elizabeth, another woman experiencing her own miraculous journey with God. During those 3 months with Elizabeth, away from her community, Mary composed what we now know as the Magnificat, one of the most powerful songs of praise in Scripture. This wasn't just poetry. It was the fruit of deep, intimate partnership with God. "My soul glorifies the Lord. and my spirit rejoices in God my Savior. Luke 1:46-47. These words weren't written in a temple or proclaimed in a crowd. They were born in solitude, in the quiet spaces where God meets us most intimately. But here's what's fascinating. Mary's solitude wasn't empty. It was filled with divine presence. In those quiet moments, she wasn't developing loneliness. She was developing a partnership that would sustain her through everything that was to come. And believe me, she would need this partnership. Think about the journey ahead, the whispers in Nazareth, the long journey to Bethlehem, the flight to Egypt. At each step, Mary's partnership with God grew stronger precisely because she had learned to walk alone with Him. This is what I want you to understand. When God calls you to walk alone, He's not calling you to loneliness. He's inviting you into partnership. Just like Mary, your moments of solitude can become sacred spaces where divine partnership flourishes. You see, in our noisy, connected world, we've almost forgotten how to be alone with God. We fill every quiet moment with distractions, every space with voices. But what if, like Mary, your season of walking alone is actually an invitation to the most profound partnership you'll ever experience? As we begin to understand this divine partnership more deeply, we discover something remarkable, the incredible inner strength that develops when we learn to walk alone with God. This strength isn't just about endurance. It's about transformation. The story of Mary shows us that divine partnership isn't just about receiving messages from God. It's about becoming a vessel for His purposes. When we embrace our solitary walks as opportunities for divine partnership, we discover a companionship that transforms every step of our journey into sacred ground. Part 3. Building Inner Strength. Have you ever wondered where true inner strength comes from? What if I told you that the most profound strength isn't built in crowds, but in silence? And what if the very moments when you feel most alone are actually your greatest opportunities for spiritual growth? Let me share with you the remarkable story of Hannah, a woman who discovered extraordinary inner strength through her solitary journey. In the first book of Samuel, we meet a woman whose heart was breaking under the weight of childlessness. In ancient Israel, this wasn't just a personal sorrow. It was a social stigma that cut deep into a woman's identity and worth. Picture the scene at the temple in Shiloh. Hannah, surrounded by people yet utterly alone, faced not just the pain of infertility, but also the constant mockery of her husband's other wife, Peninnah. Year after year, this torment continued. Can you imagine the emotional toll, the constant reminder of what society deemed as her failure? But here's where Hannah's story takes a fascinating turn. Instead of seeking comfort in crowds or drowning her sorrows in distractions, she chose a different path. In 1 Samuel 1:10, we read, in her deep anguish, Hannah prayed to the Lord, weeping bitterly. What's remarkable isn't just that she prayed, it's how she prayed. The Bible tells us her lips were moving, but her voice was silent. So profound was her private communion with God that Eli, the high priest, mistook her for being drunk. Think about that for a moment. Her connection with God was so intense, so personal, that it appeared strange to those watching. This is where we discover something profound about building inner strength. In her most vulnerable moment, Hannah wasn't seeking human validation or comfort. She was developing what I call spiritual muscles, the kind that can only be built in solitude. But here's the truly transformative part of Hannah's story. Her prayer wasn't just a desperate plea. It was a conversation that changed her entire perspective. After pouring out her heart to God before her prayer was even answered, the Bible tells us her face was no longer downcast. What changed? Not her circumstances, but her inner strength. This brings us to a crucial truth about building inner strength. It's not about becoming hardened or independent. It's about developing a deep, unshakable connection with God that sustains you regardless of external circumstances. Hannah's story shows us that true strength isn't the absence of tears. It's finding purpose in our pain. The Hebrew word used for Hannah's prayer is palal, which implies self-judgment and introspection. This wasn't just asking for what she wanted. This was deep, transformative inner work. In her solitude, Hannah wasn't just building strength. She was discovering who she truly was in God's presence. Think about your own journey for a moment. Those quiet moments when you feel most alone. Could they be opportunities for building this kind of strength? What if your seasons of solitude are actually divine appointments for developing unshakable faith? Hannah's story reaches its climax, not just with the birth of Samuel, but with her song of praise in 1 Samuel 2, a powerful declaration of strength that later inspired Mary's magnification. This woman, who once prayed in silent tears, found a voice that would echo through generations. But here's what makes this relevant to your journey today. Hannah's strength wasn't built overnight. It was forged in repeated visits to the temple, in countless silent prayers, in choosing to return to God again and again, with her pain and her hopes. This is how real inner strength is built, not in dramatic moments, but in faithful persistence. As we begin to understand how this inner strength is built, we discover something even more revolutionary, how it leads us to a profound understanding of our true worth. When you build strength in solitude with God, you begin to see yourself through His eyes, not through the lens of society's expectations. Remember, like Hannah, your moments of solitude aren't punishments. They're opportunities for developing a strength that the world can't give and can't take away. This is the kind of strength that doesn't just survive trials. It transforms them into testimonies. Part 4. Discovering true worth. Have you ever wondered what it truly means to find your worth in God's eyes? What happens when you strip away all the social validation, all the friendships, all the external markers of value that society tells us we need? And what if I told you that one of the most powerful stories of discovering true worth comes from a woman who risked everything, even her life, by standing alone? Let me take you back to ancient Persia, to a time when being Jewish was dangerous, when being a woman meant having limited power, and when being an orphan meant starting life with 3 strikes against you. This is the story of Esther, but not the fairy tale version you might have heard before. Imagine being a young Jewish girl, raised by your cousin in a foreign land. Your very identity is a secret you must keep. Your people are minorities in a vast empire that could turn against them at any moment. This was Esther's reality. When she was chosen for the king's harem, it wasn't a romantic selection. It was a situation filled with fear, uncertainty, and isolation. But here's where the story takes an extraordinary turn. In the midst of this solitude, in the heart of a palace where she couldn't even reveal her true identity, Esther began to discover something profound about her worth. The Bible tells us that she won favor in the eyes of all who saw her. Esther 2:15. But notice something crucial here. It wasn't because she was trying to please everyone. The text specifically mentions that she did not request anything except what Haggai, the king's eunuch who was in charge of the women, suggested. Think about that for a moment. In a situation where most women would have grasped at anything to gain advantage, Esther remained true to herself. She understood something that many of us struggle with today, that her worth wasn't determined by how many friends she had in the palace, or how many luxuries she could acquire, or even how much the king favored her. But the real test of Esther's understanding of her true worth came when her people faced annihilation. Haman, a high-ranking official, had convinced the king to issue a decree to destroy all Jews. Esther faced a choice that would reveal exactly where she found her worth. She could remain silent, protecting her position and her life, or she could risk everything by approaching the king uninvited, an act punishable by death. Her cousin Mordecai's words echo through history. Who knows but that you have come to your royal position for such a time as this? Therefore, 14. In that moment, Esther's response reveals a woman who had found her worth not in her crown, not in her relationships, but in her divine purpose. Her famous words, "If I perish, I perish, I perish, I perish," if the 4:16, weren't spoken in desperation, but in dignified acceptance of her true worth and calling. What happened next was extraordinary. Esther approached the king, and instead of being executed, she was extended the golden scepter. But here's what's often missed in this story. She didn't immediately blurt out her request. Instead, she demonstrated remarkable wisdom and self-control, inviting the king and Haman to not one, but 2 banquets. Her worth wasn't tied to immediate results. She understood the value of divine timing. This brings us to a crucial truth about discovering your worth. It's not found in immediate acceptance or validation from others. Esther's worth wasn't determined by the king's response or even by her success in saving her people. Her worth was established long before that moment, in the quiet times when she stood alone, understanding who she was in God's eyes. As we begin to grasp this profound truth about our worth, we discover something even more liberating. The freedom that comes from being anchored in God's validation rather than human approval. This understanding opens the door to a kind of liberty that most people never experience. You see, Esther's story teaches us that true worth isn't something we achieve through social connections or accomplishments. It's something we discover when we're willing to stand alone for what matters most. It's found not in the crowd's approval, but in the quiet certainty that we are exactly where God has placed us for such a time as this. And just as Esther's solitary stance led to the salvation of her people, your understanding of your true worth has the power to impact not just your life, but the lives of countless others who might be watching your journey, learning from your courage, and finding hope in your story. Part 5. The freedom of walking alone. Have you ever wondered what true freedom feels like? What would your life look like if you were liberated from the constant need for social approval? And what if I told you that walking alone could be your path to the most profound freedom you've ever experienced? Let me share with you the remarkable story of Anna the prophetess from the Gospel of Luke. Her story of freedom through solitude is one that often goes untold, yet it holds incredible power for us today. Picture this. The temple in Jerusalem around 2,000 years ago. Anna, a widow who had lost her husband after only 7 years of marriage, made a decision that many found puzzling. Instead of remarrying or seeking social security through family connections, she chose to dedicate herself entirely to God. Luke 2:37 tells us, "She never left the temple but worshipped night and day, fasting and praying." But here's what makes Anna's story fascinating. She wasn't just surviving in her solitude, she was thriving. For approximately 84 years, she lived a life that by today's standards would seem incredibly lonely. Yet, through her choice to walk alone, she discovered a freedom that few in her time understood. Think about the cultural context for a moment. In 1st century Jerusalem, a widow without family support faced not just social stigma, but often severe hardship. Women were expected to find their security in marriage and family connections. But Anna chose differently. In her solitude, she developed something remarkable, a clarity of purpose that couldn't be shaken by social pressures or others' expectations. When Mary and Joseph brought the infant Jesus to the temple, it was Anna who recognized him immediately. While others missed this pivotal moment, her spiritual discernment, honed through years of solitary devotion, allowed her to see what others couldn't. This brings us to a profound truth about the freedom of walking alone. When you're not constantly adjusting your life to meet others' expectations, you develop an extraordinary ability to hear God's voice and discern His purpose. But let's make this personal for a moment. How often have you made decisions based on what others might think? How many times have you hesitated to follow your divine calling because it didn't fit society's script? Anna's story teaches us that true freedom isn't found in having multiple social connections. It's found in having the right connection. Her solitary path wasn't a prison. It was a portal to profound spiritual freedom. In our modern context, this truth becomes even more relevant. We live in a world where social media constantly tells us what our lives should look like. where success is often measured by the size of our network rather than the depth of our purpose. But here's the liberating truth. When you choose to walk alone with God, you're not choosing isolation. You're choosing liberation. You're choosing liberation. You're free to make decisions based on divine guidance rather than social pressure. Develop your spiritual gifts without comparison or competition. Build boundaries that protect your purpose. Live authentically rather than performatively. Remember what Scripture tells us in Galatians 5:1. It is for freedom that Christ has set us free. Stand firm, then, and do not let yourselves be burdened again by a yoke of slavery. The freedom of walking alone isn't about being antisocial. It's about being pro-purpose. It's about creating space in your life where God's voice can be heard clearly, where His direction can be followed faithfully, and where your unique calling can be pursued boldly. But this freedom leads us to something even more profound, the discovery of your divine purpose. As we'll explore next, when you're freed from the constant need for social validation, you create space for God to reveal His unique plan for your life. Your solitary path isn't a detour. It's a direct route to the purpose God has designed specifically for you. The question isn't whether you're alone. It's whether you're ready to embrace the freedom that comes with walking your unique path with God. Part 6. Finding your divine purpose. Have you ever wondered why some women are called to walk a path that others don't understand? What if your season of solitude isn't just a phase, but a divine appointment with destiny? And what if Mary, the mother of Jesus, could teach us something profound about embracing a unique calling? Let me take you back to Nazareth, to a moment that would change not just one woman's life, but the entire course of human history. Picture a young woman, barely more than a girl, going about her daily routine. Mary, likely around 14 or 15 years old, lived in a small town where everyone knew everyone else's business. In that culture, a woman's worth was measured by her marriage, her children, and her social connections. But God had a different plan for Mary, one that would initially separate her from everything familiar and comfortable. When the angel Gabriel appeared to her, Mary's world turned upside down. "Greetings, you who are highly favored. The Lord is with you." Luke 1:28. Can you imagine the weight of those words? The fear, the uncertainty, the overwhelming sense of divine purpose. What happens next is extraordinary. The angel tells her she will conceive a child through the Holy Spirit before her marriage to Joseph. In that culture, this meant potential shame, rejection, and even death by stoning. This wasn't just a spiritual journey. It was a path that would lead to profound solitude. But listen to Mary's response. "I am the Lord's servant. May your word to me be fulfilled." Luke 1:38. This wasn't blind acceptance. This was courage. This was faith. This was a woman recognizing that her divine purpose might require her to walk alone. Think about what followed: the whispers in the marketplace, the questioning looks. Even Joseph, her betrothed, initially planned to divorce her quietly. Mary faced the prospect of complete social isolation. Yet in this solitude, something remarkable happened. She didn't run from her purpose. Instead, she ran to Elizabeth, another woman experiencing a miraculous pregnancy. In this season of separation from normal society, Mary composed one of the most powerful songs of praise recorded in Scripture. The Magnificat. "My soul glorifies the Lord, and my spirit rejoices in God my Savior." Luke 1:46-47. This is where we discover something profound about divine purpose. Sometimes it requires us to step away from the crowd. Sometimes it demands that we embrace solitude not as a punishment, but as a preparation. Mary's solitary journey wasn't about isolation. It was about intimacy with God. In her aloneness, she developed a strength that couldn't have been forged in the comfort of community. Her purpose required her to carry something that others couldn't understand, just as you might be carrying a calling that others don't comprehend. Consider how this applies to your life right now. Are you feeling separated from others because of your convictions? Are you walking a path that few understand? This might not be a detour. It might be a detour. It might be your destiny. Your purpose, like Mary's, might require a season of solitude, not because you're being punished, but because you're being prepared. Just as a seed must be buried alone in the dark earth before it can sprout and bear fruit, your season of solitude might be the very soil from which your purpose will grow. As we embrace this divine purpose, something remarkable begins to happen. The very solitude that once felt like a burden becomes a blessing. The path that seemed lonely becomes sacred. And this leads us to perhaps the most powerful part of our journey, the transformation that occurs when we fully embrace our divine calling. Remember, Mary's solitude preceded history's greatest miracle. Your solitary path might just be preparing you for your own divine appointment with destiny. The question isn't whether you walk alone. It's whether you're willing to trust that your solitude has a sacred purpose. In our next section, we'll explore how this understanding transforms not just our perspective, but our entire journey. Are you ready to discover the power that awaits when you fully embrace your divine purpose? Part 7. The Transformation Journey. Have you ever wondered what true transformation looks like in a woman's life? What happens when she finally stops seeking approval from others and starts living from a place of unshakable faith? And most importantly, what if I told you that your season of solitude is actually your cocoon of transformation? Let me share with you the remarkable story of Mary Magdalene, a woman whose transformation journey speaks directly to our hearts today. Picture 1st century Judea, where a woman's worth was measured by her relationships and social standing. Mary Magdalene's story begins in a place of complete brokenness, possessed by 7 demons, living on the outskirts of society. But something extraordinary happened when she encountered Jesus. Luke 8:2 tells us that Jesus cast out those 7 demons. Yet what's often overlooked is what happened after her deliverance. Her profound transformation from a woman defined by her past to one defined by her purpose. Think about this for a moment. In a culture where women weren't even considered reliable witnesses, Mary Magdalene became the first witness to the resurrection. How did this radical transformation occur? The key lies in how she chose to walk after her encounter with Christ. While others returned to their normal lives, Mary chose a different path. She followed Jesus, often alone in her conviction, often misunderstood by others, including the disciples. Mark's gospel shows us something fascinating about Mary's journey. When Jesus was crucified, we read that many women were watching from a distance. But Mary Magdalene, she stayed close. When everyone else fled, she remained. When it seemed all hope was lost, she persisted. This is where we discover the first key to transformation: persistence in solitude. Mary didn't need the validation of the crowd. She had found something more valuable, an unshakable faith born the crucible of standing alone. But the story gets even more powerful. On that first Easter morning, while others slept, Mary went to the tomb alone. John 20:1 tells us it was still dark. Can you imagine the courage this took? Walking through a garden in the dark, going to a tomb all by herself, this solitary act of devotion positioned her for the greatest revelation. When she discovered the empty tomb, she didn't run to gather a committee or seek consensus. She stood there, alone, weeping, seeking, questioning. And in that solitary moment, she became the first person to see the risen Christ. Here's what's remarkable about this encounter. Jesus didn't appear to her in the temple, surrounded by crowds. He met her in her solitude, in her moment of deepest questioning. This teaches us something profound about transformation. It often happens in our most solitary moments. Think about your own journey. Those moments when you felt most alone. Weren't they often the moments that shaped you most deeply? The times when you had to stand in your faith without anyone else's support? Weren't those the times your faith grew strongest? Mary's story shows us that transformation isn't just about changing our circumstances. It's about changing how we see ourselves. After her encounter with the risen Christ, she didn't need anyone else's validation. She had been transformed from a woman seeking approval to one carrying divine purpose. Let me share something powerful with you. In John 20:18, it says, Mary Magdalene went to the disciples with the news. I have seen the Lord. Notice the authority in her voice. No hesitation, no seeking permission, no need for validation, no need for validation. This is what transformation looks like, moving from seeking approval to walking in authority. As we draw this journey to a close, remember that your solitary path isn't just about being alone. It's about being transformed. Like Mary Magdalene, you're not just walking through a season of solitude. You're walking through a season of solitude. You're walking through a season of preparation. Every moment alone with God is molding you, shaping you, preparing you for a purpose greater than you can imagine. The question isn't whether you're walking alone. It's who you're becoming in your solitude. Are you allowing these moments to transform you? Are you letting go of the need for others' approval and embracing the authority God has given you? Because here's the truth. Just as Mary Magdalene's solitary faithfulness positioned her to be the first witness of the resurrection, your solitary journey is positioning you for something extraordinary. Your transformation isn't just about you, it's about the testimony your life will become. Conclusion: never truly alone. As we come to the end of this powerful journey together, I want you to remember something profound. Your solitary path isn't a punishment. It's a position of power. Throughout this message, we've uncovered timeless truths, like Ruth, who found her destiny in a foreign land, like Esther, who stood alone before a king, and like Mary Magdalene, who discovered her purpose in solitude. Your story of walking alone is part of a greater divine narrative. Remember the transformative power we discovered. The strength that comes not from crowds, but from an intimate relationship with God. The wisdom found not in constant companionship, but in sacred solitude. The authority that emerges not from social validation, but from divine appointment. But here's my challenge to you today. Will you embrace this season of walking alone? Will you allow God to transform your solitude into strength? Will you trust that your path, though different, is divinely designed? Because here's the truth. Sometimes the most powerful position a woman can hold is standing alone, firmly rooted in her faith, unshaken by the opinions of others. If this message has touched your heart today, I invite you to share your story in the comments below. How has God been speaking to you in your season of solitude? What strength have you found in walking alone? Your testimony could be exactly what Anna's sister needs to hear today. And if you're just beginning this journey of walking alone with strength, type walking in faith in the comments. Let's create a community of strong women who understand that sometimes walking alone doesn't mean walking without purpose. It means walking with divine destiny. Before you go, if this message has blessed you, please don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell. We share these biblical truths every week, designed to strengthen and encourage you in your walk with God. Remember, dear sister, you may be walking alone, but you're never walking without purpose. Your solitude isn't your weakness, it's your preparation for greatness. Until next time, may you find extraordinary strength in your solitary walk with God. Stay blessed, stay strong, and keep walking in faith.